Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today is November 1st, so that means we have some new clubs from Spellbinders. So the first thing we have here is the wax seal of the month called Sin Sin with the coral must-have wax beads. Then we have the glimmer of the month called Luxe Links, as well as blush glimmer foil. That Lush Links makes such a beautiful background. I'm going to be using it in two different ways. The clear stamp of the month with the coordinating die set is called Go To Girl. It has a bunch of different sentiments as well as some adorable images. This is the stencil of the month called Cherry Chic, and I'm going to be using it in two different ways on two different cards. Then we have the embossing folder of the month called Luxe Lattice. This works perfectly for those backgrounds, and it kind of looks a little bit like the glimmer of the month. Then we have the 3D embossing folder, the Petite Tuft. This is the die of the month called Let's Do Brunch with several different sentiments that somehow I forget to use, but I love the little brunch pieces in there. This is the stitching die of the month called Forever Fabulous. Such an adorable little puppy in there. Then we have the BetterPress of the month called Paws in the City. So this has two different BetterPress plates to create that image as well as the template. And then there are some sentiments and a coordinating die set to cut out those sentiments. This is the large die of the month called Charmed Life. A lot of different options here to create charms for the purse die cut. This is the color inspiration that I'm using from the DIY color deck. And you can see that those colors as well as the coral wax beads all fit in with that colored picture from that DIY deck picture. So I'm going to start off with the wax seal of the month. I always start off creating a bunch of pieces first before I do my card creating. I like to use that wax seal storage case to store my seal tops as well as my handles, and I love that they're adjustable. I'm using the wax seal starter kit for the mat as well as the little scoop that holds those wax beads and the thing for the flame underneath there. So the first one, I actually don't do it properly. I didn't wait quite long enough, and the edges of that wax seal were not completely cooled down, so I ruined it. But that's the nice thing about wax is if you don't like something or if you trim something off, those pieces don't go to waste. You can reuse them. So I just took that wax seal and put it right back in the little melting pot, poured more, and then let it dry. To mix up my wax beads when they are melting to make sure that they are all melted, I just use a toothpick for that. But when it comes time to cleaning out that little scoop, I like to use that silicone spatula that is right there to my right. Because it's silicone, I can clean everything off and then it will cool off and I can just peel everything and again, reuse those wax pieces. So I'm going to create 3 different seals here. I'm only going to be using one of them, but I always like to have more than I plan on using just in case I change my mind while I'm creating, because I do that all the time. So after pouring the wax for the last seal, I use that silicone spatula to clean out that little scoop there. Then I use a clean piece of paper towel to clean off that scoop while everything is still hot. It is hot when you're doing it with that wax or with that paper towel, but it cleans off so much better when everything is nice and warm. Makes it really easy to get everything ready for the next time that you're going to use it. For my wax seal, I'm going to embellish it with the bouillon powder here. This is a new product from Spellbinders. This is silver. It comes in silver and gold. It has like a makeup applicator with it, and you just rub it over top of wherever you want to color on your wax seal. This is the first time I'm using it, and I think it will work better on darker colors of wax than the lighter colors. You can definitely see it on the lighter colors, but I think you'll see it more on darker colors. After applying it, I do use my fingers to see if it rubs off, and I get some excess off on my fingers, but you can see that I don't rub everything off of that wax seal. So this is a great way, like I said, it comes in gold and silver, a great way to embellish your wax seals. I typically use Posca markers when I'm doing this, but I really wanted to try this out and see what it looked like, and I plan on using it in more because it just has a different look than Posca markers. It gives it like a luster shimmer to it. It's really, really beautiful. So I'm going to tuck those to the side, and then the next thing I'm going to do is grab my Glimmer system, and I'm going to do some foiled backgrounds with that Glimmer of the month. I'm doing it on several different colored cardstocks here. So I have some indigo cardstock, cosmic sky, Orchid, as well as a piece of hammermill cardstock. I wasn't sure which colors I was going to want for my backgrounds when it came time to creating, but like I said before, I always love to have extra options while I'm creating because I often will change my mind, think I want one color and realize a different color is going to look better, or just change my mind on what exactly I want to do. So that blush cardstock looks really, really pretty on that indigo cardstock, and here it is on the Cosmic Sky. I am going to do some solid hot foiling with a few of the background pieces, but I'm not going to do it with all of them. I don't necessarily need that many backgrounds, and I don't want to waste time with foiling things that I'm not actually going to end up using. So here are those 4 backgrounds with that Glimmer of the Month plate, and I'll be using it again later in the video with a different way of using it. I'm also going to foil the sentiments that go with that plate. I put them on my Glimmer system, and I'm going to do it with those same 4 colored cardstocks because, again, as I'm creating, I'm not sure what color background for those foiled sentiments are going to work best with what I'm creating. So I always like to have those extra options. Any extra sentiments are going to be put in a Ziploc bag right with the Glimmer plate or the BetterPress plate because I'm going to be doing those sentiments as well. So they're not going to go to waste. I'll use them on future projects. So you can see as I'm peeling that foil off, I do get some overfoiling with those sentiments. I'll show you in a minute how to clean up that overfoiling. When it comes time to doing solid hot foiled sentiments, I will eliminate any of the ones that have too much overfoiling to them because the solid hot foiled pieces are really not going to work well for sentiments. However, they will work well for using the outside parts of the sentiments or around the surrounding area around the sentiments for die cutting and using as specialty cardstock. And that's something that I do often. Rather than waste the foil and waste the solid hot foiled pieces, it's really easy to die cut and to use as specialty cardstocks and coordinates beautifully and perfectly with those foiled sentiments. So I use it as specialty cardstock often if I don't use it as the sentiments, the solid hot foiled sentiments, or if I don't use it for mattes, because I'll also often use the solid hot foiled pieces for mattes as well. So with my regular foiling done, I'm going to do my solid hot foiling. I have the solid hot foil plate here from Pink Fresh, and it's nice or it's the perfect size for it. It's about the size of an A2 card front. So the foiling for solid hot foiling is exactly the same as regular foiling. You just eliminate the regular foil plate and swap it for the solid hot foil plate. You still put the foil pretty side to the cardstock, or put it side to the plate, cardstock on top of it, the plate's on top of it, press that timer button, and once that timer button stops flashing, you put it through your die cutting machine. So you do need the heat from the Glimmer system plus the pressure from the die cutting machine in order to do solid hot foiling. So when it comes to the sentiments, because when I was doing those sentiments, I was doing half a sheet, I put both of them on that solid hot foil plate so that I could do both of them at the same time. That way I didn't have to take more time to do it, and I also didn't have to cut my cardstock in half in order to do that, and it works perfectly. The only thing that I'm going to be careful of when I do use these pieces for die cutting, I'm going to make sure to avoid that little crease line or that little separation line in the center. Now that my foiling is done, I'm ready to do the cleaning up of the sentiments. So I use the thicker of the Best Ever craft tape, take a piece off, probably about an inch long, and I put it on my shirt a couple times to take off some of the excess sticky, and then I just put it right onto those foiled sentiments and peel it off. That's going to peel off any of that excess foil. Anything that's left after that, I have a sand erase that I'll be using, but you can see looking at the back of the tape how much of that foil has been taken off. So I'm starting off with the foiled images on the indigo cardstock first, mainly because it's the most visible. It's the one that you can see the best, so you can see the overfoiling a little bit better on the dark blue cardstock than you can on the white cardstock. So I do this for as long as I feel like I need to. I'm only going to be doing this one on screen. The rest of them I'll be doing off screen. As soon as I find that that tape isn't taking any excess foil off, if there's anything left on there, I will start to use my sand eraser on it. Now I am fairly careful when I'm using the sand eraser, and typically I avoid the actual letters of the sentiments, but I discovered something when using the sand eraser. If I keep it nice and flat and just use a very, very light hand, it will take off that excess foiling and it doesn't ruin any of those sentiments. So just make sure that you use a really, really light hand with it when you're doing it. Just kind of practice. Try a light hand and you can kind of go over it as many times as you need to. However, I will say that when you use the sand eraser, it does leave scratch marks on your cardstock because you are scratching or sanding the upper layer of that cardstock off. So just be aware that the final result from the tape looks a little bit better than once you've used a sand eraser, but sometimes that sand eraser is necessary. But it does take that top layer of the cardstock off because that foil just doesn't want to come off it. You do need to take that top layer of cardstock off to get that excess of the foiling off. Now for this particular one, it was just a tiny little bit of shimmer around the outside of the letters, so it wasn't really a whole lot. So this is before and then this is after. So you can see that the sentiment is a lot more clear and it's a lot less messy once we've done that cleaning up of the foiling. So once we do all of the cleaning up of our foiled sentiments, and I did a tiny little bit to the background as well. There wasn't a whole lot of overfoiling for the background, but just a little bit towards the center. I'm going to match up the coordinating die set for those foiled sentiments. Now, this is the sentiments from the BetterPress plate of the month. That one has a coordinating die set that cuts out all of those sentiments at once, just like the plate foiled all of the sentiments at once. For the sentiments for the Glimmer of the month, there's 2 separate sentiments with 2 separate plates, and they have 2 separate dies. So those are individual dies. So with all of my foiling done, I'm ready to start stamping some sentiments as well as my images. So I have the clear stamp of the month here. The first thing I like to do with a new clear stamp is use a white eraser over the stamping surface. Just make sure to take any of the manufacturing residue off, and it tends to take ink a little bit better. I'm doing these images on some Bristol cardstock because I'm going to color them with some Prismacolor pencils. So the surface that I like to use those on is this Bristol cardstock. So I'm selecting the images here, putting them onto that cardstock, and then I'm using my Misty stamping tool so that I can stamp multiple times. To go with those Prismacolor pencils, I'm using some black StazOn ink. I'm going to be using some Gamsol in order to blend those Prismacolor pencils, and it doesn't react with the StazOn ink. So this is the perfect ink for it. You do, however, want to make sure to clean your stamps off and not leave any of that StazOn ink over on that stamps because they do start to degrade the stamp themselves. I'm using some Ultra Clean to clean that off, and it cleans off really, really easily. And then I don't have to worry at all about that ink degrading the stamps over time. So after I've cleaned them off, I make sure that they're nice and dry, and then I can set those images aside, put these stamps away, and then I'm going to be stamping my sentiments. Now I want to heat emboss these sentiments, and I want them done with black embossing powder as well as rose gold embossing powder. Once again, I'm not sure which color is going to work best for the different card designs I have planned, so I'd like to have them done, ready to go, and it's easy to do it all at one time. So I used a little bit of embossing powder tool on my hammer mill cardstock here. Then I ink my stamps up with Versamark ink, stamping them a couple times just to make sure that I have some nice crisp, clean images here. Then I can pour on that embossing powder, tap off the excess, and then use my heat gun in order to melt that powder right on top of that ink there. So you do want to make sure that you tap off the excess powder, and if by chance there's any powder sticking where you don't want it to go, use a soft brush to brush that off before you do your heat embossing. If you heat emboss it, it's going to melt right into the cardstock. You're never going to get that embossing powder off there. So I like to use embossing for my sentiments because it gives them that nice raised look, and I just like the difference in texture that you get with embossing than just plain ink. But if you prefer, you could just stamp this with plain StazOn ink, and then obviously clean off your stamps well, and then just do those sentiments like that. But like I said, I like the extra texture that embossing gives them. So I tend to emboss my sentiments, just personal preference. So after doing the black sentiments, I'm going to do the same steps, but I'm doing it with the rose gold embossing powder. I chose the rose gold because of the embossing powders that I have, I figured this one was going to be the most similar to that blush Glimmer foil. Once I have those heat embossed, I can match up the coordinating die sets. I like to use the thin Best Ever craft tape in order to tape those dies in place when I'm doing that die cutting. I want to make sure that those dies don't shift and move on me. Sometimes when you do the heat embossing, it curves and warps the paper a little bit. So by taping those dies in place, I know that they're placed where I want them to be and they're not going to move on me. So I'm going to cut out both those rose gold sentiments as well as the black heat embossed sentiments, set those to the side, and now we're ready to start coloring. So I have my Prismacolor pencils here. I have the 72 piece set. The color I'm using here is 997 Beige. I'm using this for the skin for all three of the girls. I'm going to do all three of the images at one time, coloring them at the same time, just to make it a little bit easier. And then I'm going to be using the Gamsol and paper stump at the same time as well. When I do that, I start with the lightest color first and then work my way to the darkest color. So with the coloring for the Prismacolor pencils, because I'm using that Gamsol in order to blend that color out, I don't need to be super picky or super careful with my coloring. So the second color here that I'm using is 942 Yellow Ochre, and I'm using it for the hair on this girl here. Next, I'm doing 937 Tuscan Red. That one is going to be the hair on this other girl here. I want her hair to be a little bit auburn-y. So when I'm coloring with those Prismacolor pencils, I basically do a light coat over the whole thing. Then I go in and am a little bit heavier where I want the shading to be. So for the hair, it's where the outside of the hair is. If that second one there has a bit of a bun or a ponytail or something on her head, so I've made it darker there as well. Next color I'm using here is 941 Light Umber, and I used it for the third girl's hair as well as for the little dog. And then I have 1104 Amethyst. This is just a light purple color, and it's going to be what I'm using for the hat on the third girl here, as well as her little outfit. I kind of just do random colors all over the whole thing here. I want to see a little bit of each color on each one of them, because when I'm creating, I want to have all of those colors from that color palette that I had chosen there. So after using that Amethyst, I go for 906 Copenhagen Blue. That is just a nice blue color that is fairly similar to the Cosmic Sky cardstock. So I'm doing several different pieces from each one of them. And like I said, I'm trying to get a little bit of each of the colors in all of them. It's just going to make it a little bit easier when I'm color matching or choosing different backgrounds and stuff like that for each one of them. The next color I'm using here is 929 Pink. So I'm going to color any of those areas that I want to be pink. So I'll do some of the little bags, some of the little shoes. Most of it is going to be the accessory pieces. So with that coloring done, I'm ready to start blending those colors together. So I pull out my Gamsol, I pour it in a tiny little bit of dish, and you only need a little bit here. I have my paper stump, and I also have some sandpaper here. This is 400 grit. You can use whatever kind you want. This is just what I happen to have in my craft room, and I just keep reusing the same piece here. These pieces are going to be die cut, so I can easily use the edges of that cardstock to make sure that I don't have ink on my paper stump, or to just clean off any of the excess color. So like I said before, I start with the lighter colors first, then I work my way to the darker colors, using that sandpaper to sand off any remaining color that might be on my paper stump there. And when I'm doing each one of those sections, I start with the lighter areas first and then go in and blend the darker areas. You can see that it blends really, really quickly and really easily. So I don't need to spend a whole lot of time with that blending either. I can just quickly blend those areas together, then move on to the next piece. When I'm doing that blending, I will do all of the areas in that same color. So I did all of the faces first, and then I did all of, well, there's only one area that had that yellow on it. But like here, I'm doing the Copenhagen Blue. So I go and do all of the areas with that blue on it. Rather than doing each individual image, it might as well do all of the same color. That way it's going to take a lot less time to clean off my paper stump between each one of those colors. Especially when it comes to the darker colors, I want to make sure to really clean off that excess ink or that excess color off that paper stump using that sandpaper. And then I will often go in and just use the sides of my cardstock or the scrap pieces, edges of my cardstock, to make sure that I've taken all that color off. When I'm trimming that cardstock down too, often I'll have little pieces left, little scraps left, and I will go and keep those pieces for doing that sampling, just to test the colors, see if I like the color palette, see if I've gotten all of the color off of my paper stump. Rather than using new pieces of cardstock, I might as well use those scrap pieces. So just like doing my sentiments, when it comes to these images here, I'm going to use that same Best Ever craft tape in order to tape my die cuts in, or my dies in place while I'm die cutting. And I reuse those same pieces of tape probably about a half a dozen times each. Once they stop sticking and my dies aren't secure on the cardstock, then I just toss them. So you end up getting a lot of use out of that craft tape because you can use it multiple times. So with each one of these pieces done, ready to go, we can start to assemble our cards. And I just love how easily it is to color with those Prismacolor pencils and to blend them. You don't have to do these images with those Prismacolor pencils. You could color them with Copics, you could watercolor them, you can do whatever you want. But I just hadn't played with the Prismacolors in just a little bit, so I thought I would pull them out. So for my first card, I'm going to be using one of my Glimmer backgrounds here. This one was done on that Cosmic Sky cardstock. And at first I was going to use my solid hot foiled piece as the matte behind it, but I just didn't really like the bits of white that were coming up behind it. It just, sometimes I don't mind that, depending on the look that I'm going for, but sometimes I do mind it. So I went and grabbed some of the matte cardstock from the Rose Gold Treasured cardstock pack, very similar in color to that blush Glimmer foil. Cut a piece to do as a matte behind here. So I trimmed down that Glimmer background to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. My rose gold piece was trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So we can see a nice frame of that rose gold around there. So I'm going to show you for the next card, just a different way to fake that rose gold cardstock. This is a way that I use often with different cardstocks, just kind of a way to fake it. It's great to be able to do that with your ink pads. So after putting my Glimmer background, I just added the sentiment as well as my little image, and she's just so adorable. I love the fact that there are die cuts to cut out those images so you can put them on a nice dark background. For my next card, I'm going to be using that embossing folder of the month, the Luxe Lattice, and I'm going to be embossing some lilac cardstock. I do make sure when I'm embossing those pieces to center my piece of cardstock in the pattern there. So in order to bring out that pattern, I'm going to be using some rose gold metallic ink from Lisa Horton Crafts. There's a new trio of inks that have just come out. It has natural pearl, rose gold, and platinum. I'm going to be using the rose gold in this card, but I'm also going to be using that natural pearl. I think it's become my favorite pad. It's just so pretty, so I'll be using that in this video as well. So I want to highlight the embossed texture on here. So I'm taking my brayer and I'm just inking it up and then lightly rubbing it over the top. Often when I'm inking embossing cardstock, I will just rub my pad over top of it, but you don't have control. Sometimes you will press a little bit too hard and you'll get a little bit of ink on that background. And especially with these metallic ink pads from Lisa Horton Crafts, they're foam, so they have a lot of give to them. So it's really hard to just stay on that raised surface. So by using that brayer, it makes it really easy to stay just on that raised surface. So I'm going to use that same pad on a piece of hammer-on cardstock to ink around it to fake that rose gold cardstock. So you can see how easy it was, and it looks very, very similar. So if you don't happen to have rose gold cardstock, but you have a metallic ink pad that is similar in color to what you want, this is a great way to fake it. And I only have to ink around the outside edges because the inside part is going to be completely covered anyways. So there's no point in wasting the ink on the center. So that mat there that I did the rose gold ink on was trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My embossed piece here is trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I'm going to keep the very same layout for these first 3 cards. I like the sentiment towards the bottom and then the image above it. But if you wanted, if you preferred, you could alter them if you want. Or you could do multiple images on the same card. I wanted to have just a single image and a single sentiment and have the backgrounds as part of the design as well. I wanted to be able to see the Glimmer background as well as that embossed background. For this next one here, I'm going to be using that Cherry Chic stencil of the month, creating a background for my third little figure. So I'm starting off with some hammermill cardstock. I do have my stencil taped in place. There's a little border around there that sticks to the sticky mat, but sometimes that border is just a little bit too thin, and I wanted to make sure that that was going to stay where I wanted it to. So I'm using some shaded lilac distress ink to start off with my first layer. I'm using some Pink Fresh, the 1-inch brushes. These are perfect for doing these backgrounds here. Now when I'm doing this ink, I'm not doing it evenly. I'm making it heavy in some areas and lighter in some other areas purposely. This to me, and this is just personal preference, I think it looks a little bit more interesting when there's some lighter areas and some darker areas. If you prefer, you absolutely could do an even layer over the whole thing if you prefer to have it even all the way around. Again, this is just personal preference. It's not law or anything. You can have fun and do your background how you want it. That second color there was Prized Ribbon. And we're going to go in with the next stencil, and we're going to do some Twisted Citron here. This one here has the stems of the cherries, and I thought the bright green of the Twisted Citron would be perfect for it. So for this one, I have my Spellbinders large ink blending brush here. I didn't have one for this color with my pink fresh ones, so I just grabbed another brush. Again, you can use whatever brushes you want. I like these Spellbinders brushes as well as the pink fresh ones because you can get a really light coat of ink with it and you have a lot of control. So I do really like both of them for creating with. I only pick and choose which ones between those ones depending on the sizes of the openings, and I typically will pick smaller brush for smaller sizes, but that's not necessarily the I sometimes break my own rule here. So for the cherries here, I'm using some aged mahogany, and I'm trying to be fairly light coated with it. I don't want it to be really, really dark. I want to keep those cherries a little bit bright. But again, you can see that I'm not doing an even coat over the whole thing. There's some areas that are darker, some areas that are lighter, and I do that intentionally. Again, personal preference, and I just think it looks a little bit more interesting. So for each one of those layers for the stencil, I do use that painter's tape to hold it in place just to make sure that I don't necessarily have to hold the stencil myself. This last layer here does the second part of the leaves as well as just a little shine mark on the cherries. I did that with that Twisted Citron as well. Doing it over top of the aged mahogany, it's not going to really look too green. It's just going to kind of darken that aged mahogany, but it's going to give that little detail on those cherries there. So I'm going to use some Cosmic Sky cardstock for the mat around it. So that is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My stencil piece here, I trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. Now we're ready to put it on our A2 card base here. And again, I'm going to keep the same design as I did for the first 2 cards. I'm going to do my background and my mat, and then I'm going to put the sentiment towards the bottom and then my image towards the top. And again, you can swap those if you prefer. Just personal preference. I tend to like the sentiment towards the bottom and the image above it. Now, the great thing about these images with the coordinating dies, it has a little bit of a halo around it. So we're not having a busy background right with that image. We have that halo around it. So it gives a little bit of a break between the image and the background. To add just a little bit of extra texture to these pieces, I'm just putting a little bit of stickles on some different areas. So little bows on some of the shopping bags, just to give it that little bit of texture. I'm using Stardust stickle, so it doesn't have any color to it. It's just going to add some sparkle. You're still going to be able to see whatever color was underneath it. And again, it just adds that little bit of texture. It's something to catch the light when you're looking at the card. So it's a great way just to give it just a little bit of extra, if you know what I mean. For my next card here, I'm using the BetterPress of the month. I'm going to tape down the template that comes with it, and that's just going to allow us to place the dog and the leash in the perfect position to go with our little figure here. So I'm doing this on that Bristol cardstock as well because I am going to be coloring it with those Prismacolor pencils. So for the first plate here, I'm inking it with that same Black Stays On ink that I used with those clear stamps, putting that clear plate onto the base of my BetterPress system and then running it through my Platinum 6 machine to press that image into that Bristol cardstock. For the next part of the image, I thought because this image has 2 different pieces to it, it would be fun to use something different for doing this piece. Because we have that opportunity, why not? So I'm using a little bit of embossing powder tool on that Bristol cardstock to make sure that my embossing powder, because I'm going to heat emboss this, is only going to stick to my ink. I ink it with some Versamark ink, make sure that it's placed perfectly according to the template, then put my clear plate to the base and run it through my Platinum 6 machine again. And I'm going to heat emboss this with that rose gold powder that I used with some of those sentiments. I thought it would be nice to have that rose gold leash there, and then I thought that rose gold powder would look good with whatever color I choose to color the dog with, and I'm going to be doing the same color as I did for the dog with the stamped images. So once I have that powder poured on there, tap the excess off and make sure there's no crystals where I don't want them to go. I heat emboss that embossing powder, and I just love the look of that same image with those 2 different finishes. So I'm going to start off with that 997 beige to do all of those skin pieces. And the coloring for this is very similar to coloring those stamped images. The only thing I do differently for this than I do with that is I color a little bit of the sky behind her. There's no die to cut out this image, so I'm going to have to do a background with her. And I don't color the entire piece of cardstock. I do just a little bit of a halo around the girl, the dog, and the leash, just to add the suggestion of a background there. And I think it looks a little bit more interesting. So I use that 941 light umber for the dog. Then I use the 906 Copenhagen blue for her skirt as well as her hat. And the coloring I'm doing is very similar to how I did the stamped images as well. I'm just doing a light coat over the whole thing, and then I'm going in and being a little bit darker where I want those images to be darker. So this here is the 1104 Amethyst. Then I'm using 904 light cerulean blue for the sky behind her. And again, you could do whatever color you wanted. You could actually draw an image behind there if that is your cup of tea or your forte. It's definitely not mine. So for me, just doing the suggestion of the sky behind is enough for me. And I'm doing it in a blue that's different from the Copenhagen blue that I do for her skirt and her hat. I want to make sure to be able to see a different color that is behind her than that she's wearing. So the color of the sky here is a lot lighter than the color of her skirt as well as her hat. So with my coloring done, I'm ready to pull out my Gamsol. I bring that dish back out, pour a little bit into it, and then I'm doing the coloring the exact same way as those stamped images. The only thing that I'm going to be a little bit different with is I'm going to be careful when I'm coloring the dog. I think the Gamsol is going to react with that embossing powder. So when it comes to coloring the dog as well as the leash in front of, or around the leash in front of the sky, I'm just going to be a little bit more careful. I'm going to try to avoid that embossing powder. When it comes to coloring the dog, if I hit the embossing powder, it's not that big a deal because the color of the embossing powder isn't a whole lot different from the light umber color that I used to color the dog. But when it comes to the leash, obviously I don't want to smear any of that color into the sky. So just like those stamped images, I start with the lighter colors. When I'm going between different colors, I am going to be using that sandpaper to sand off any color off of my little paper stump there. I do my background first before doing the figure because I want to make sure that that is all completely blended. I typically, when I'm doing my coloring, I kind of work from the back to the front. There's some mediums that you need to do that with, some that you don't necessarily. I could color her and then color the background, but I just wanted to make sure that that background was nice and blended out first before I worked on the detail of her or the little dog or the figure. So with coloring here, with blending here, I am kind of working in circular motions when it comes to the sky. When you're doing the coloring with the Prismacolor pencil, sometimes you get a little bit of pencil marks. They're not really harsh pencil marks because I'm really light-handed when it comes to coloring with them because it makes it easier to do the blending. You also don't get the marks from pressing that pencil down into the cardstock if you're really light-handed with it. But I also want to make sure that I don't happen to have any of those marks there. So by using a little circular motion, especially when it comes to the sky, I find that it's easier to blend it out, and I try to blend it out into nothing. So even where the end of my pencil coloring goes, I blend it out just a little bit farther than that so that it kind of fades out a little bit. It's really hard to see when you're looking at it once or as it's colored. It looks like there's a harsher line than there actually is in person. So I trimmed down a piece of Cosmic Sky cardstock for my mat. That is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And then I trimmed this image piece down to 3 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And now I can choose one of those sentiments to go with this card. Now I thought I was going to choose the one with the orchid cardstock with the purple because her shirt is purple and I thought it would tie that in nicely, but it just kind of looked a little bit off. It looked like it didn't really belong. So I chose the one that had the Cosmic Sky cardstock for the background. And I chose the one that had the For Real sentiment because I thought it worked perfectly because she was walking a dog. So for my next card, I'm going to be using the Let's Do Brunch die of the month. I'm actually going to use this for the next 2 cards. In this die set, it has a champagne glass or a champagne flute, and I thought it would be cute to do just a card with just 2 little champagne flutes. They're just so cute. So I thought it would be perfect for them. So I have some orchid pieces of cardstock cut to go behind the bubbles behind the champagne flute, and then some for the drink in there. I've already chosen one of the sentiments that was from the stamp of the month. Now, I completely forgot when doing these cards that this die set has sentiments with it that are brunch themed. So I didn't even realize it until I was cleaning up after the video that I had totally forgotten about that. So if you want sentiments that are totally brunch themed, there is one with the stamp, I think it's the stamp of the month, then definitely choose the sentiments that are in this die set, and there's 3 of them to choose from, so I like the fact that there's some variety in there. So my champagne flutes are done. I can put those to the side to dry. The bows on them are die cut from Cosmic Sky cardstock. I wanted something that was a little bit contrasting in color to the champagne flutes themselves, as well as the drink, and those champagne flutes were die cut out of some silver matte cardstock from the Silver Treasure cardstock pack. For the background of my card here, I have some lavender cardstock. This is embossed with that 3D embossing folder of the month. Now it is 4 inches by, or 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I normally trim them down before inking, but I didn't for this one. Typically I would though, so that I have the finished size so I can ink it how I want. Now this is that natural pearl pad from that new 3-pack from Lisa Horton Crafts that I was talking about. So it has this beautiful pearl color. I'm doing it heavier around the outside of that embossing and lighter towards the inside because I want to see that pearl, but I don't necessarily want it to all end up being that white color. So you can use different pressures with the pad and get it heavier in some areas, lighter in some areas. And then I take just a little bit off and trim it down to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. I don't intend to have a double mat on here or an image area and then a mat around that because I just thought this background was so pretty and I didn't think it really needed to be framed at all. So I'm going to put the sentiment above the champagne flutes for this particular card, only to make it different from the last several that I did. Then I'm going to add those little champagne flutes. Now I want to make sure to be fairly generous with the glue when working with embossing cardstock because there's a lot of raised and recessed areas. You want to make sure that it has some good contact, but I just love that little pearl shine that natural pearl pad gives that background. It really brings out the pattern of that background. To add just a little bit of extra texture, I'm using some glossy accents on the bubbles in the champagne. So I'm going to just put bubbles on there and then set that aside to completely dry. It's just going to add a little bit of shine as well as a little bit of rounded dimension to it. For the next card here, I'm also using that Let's Do Brunch die of the month. I just thought the bacon and eggs were absolutely adorable, so I wanted to create with them. So I have the background of the eggs die cut out of some alabaster cardstock. The yolks here are die cut out of some beeswax cardstock. And I'm going to glue those together. I'm going to wait and add the arms and legs once my pieces are done here and once I've done a little bit of ink blending on them. For the bacon, the background piece that's going to be the eyes is done with some truffle cardstock, and then the front part of the bacon is die cut out of some cinnamon cardstock, and then that little stripe down the center is also done with some of the alabaster cardstock. So you could leave these pieces as is and not do ink blending on them, but I thought doing a little bit of ink blending would just add a little bit of visual dimension to them, but they're absolutely adorable. So I'm going to do the ink blending before adding the arms and legs as well. So I'm using some scattered straw distress ink to go just around the outside edges of the egg, and I'm not making sure to be even all the way around. I have some areas that are a little bit heavier, some that are a little bit lighter, but I'm making sure not to be too heavy with the ink. I don't really want to color, I just want to add a little bit of shading. For the bacon, I thought it would be fun to use that rose gold pad. So it gives it the color, but it also gives that tiny little bit of shine. You know how bacon has a little tiny bit of shimmer, especially in the little fatty areas? I thought that was a good way to ink those. So a little bit of that around the outside edges. And now is where I'm going to be using that glimmer of the month in a different way. So the glimmer plates are often used for doing hot foiling, but you can also emboss with them just like you can with the BetterPress plates. And it's just an alternative to an embossing folder. It has a different look to it. So I'm going to be using the stacking on my Platinum 6 machine for embossing a die. So I have my plate on the bottom, I have that rubber mat, and then I have my cardstock, and I'm using some Cosmic Sky cardstock here. indigo cardstock here. Then I put my plate on, centering it, and then I put the other embossing plate on there, the gray one, and emboss it. And you can see you can use either side of this cardstock here. It just has a different look to it than embossing does. But again, it gives your plate, your Glimmer plates, a second use. And obviously this is not something that you would do with every single Glimmer plate. Some would work well with it and some would not work well for this. This was just a perfect way to add a different background and use this plate in a different way. You could do a little bit of ink blending on that background to bring out that pattern, but I wanted the little eggs and bacon here to be the star of the show. So I'm going to set that aside to dry, and that Glimmer background there was trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. It didn't need another mat around it. So I glued that to my card base, set that to the side, and now we're ready to add those arms and legs to our eggs and bacon. These were just die cut out of that same truffle cardstock. It's a nice dark brown, and I didn't necessarily want anything done with harsh black, so this was the perfect color for that. So I'm going to use, there's different arms and different legs to choose from. For all of these, I'm using the same type of legs, but the arms have different positions to them. So I'm kind of paying attention to which people are, or which pieces are going to be beside each one and which positions I think the arm should be in. So for the bacon, I have the two of them. They're going to have curved arms on the sides facing each other, and I want to link them when it comes to putting them on the cards. I thought that would look kind of cute. With the eggs, I'm just going to have one in front of the other one. So once I glue them in place, and I'm just using Barely Art glue for gluing everything. I have it in a nice fine line bottle, so it works for gluing my cards together. It also works really, really well for gluing all of these little tiny pieces in there because of that fine tip on the bottom. Or yeah, the fine... Yes. So as I'm gluing them down, I want to link the arms of the bacon here. And in my head, this was going to go a lot smoother than it actually did. It took a minute to use my die pick to pick up the arm from the one that I had glued down and thread it through the other one. It worked in the end, but I thought it was going to be a lot quicker and a lot easier when I actually did it than it was. So now we can glue the eggs, and I have 2 of each. Typically when I'm doing cards, I'll have an odd number. So I'll have like 3 of something or 5 of something. For this, I just thought 2 eggs and 2 bacon just kind of made sense, but you can obviously alter the amounts as you see fit. There's also other things in that die set. There's waffle, and I think that would be cute as well, but I just really wanted just the eggs and bacon. So because I want these eggs to look like they're sunny side eggs, I'm going to use some glossy accents on just the yolks of them and then set them aside to dry. And when I let those dry, typically we'll wait about an hour. If it's just dots of glossy accents, half an hour is usually pretty good. But when it's a larger area, I usually wait about an hour before I move them. I don't want the glossy accents to start running or to lean more towards one side. It doesn't show up as much in the camera as it does in real life, but it adds some beautiful shimmer, beautiful shine to the yolk of the egg. For my next card, I'm going to be using that foiled background that was done on the Hammer Mill cardstock, but I want to use the new Sunset Pink Interference pad from Lisa Horton Crafts. This one is an exclusive one to scrapbook.com. So you can only get it through there, but it's a really beautiful pink that has like a yellowy gold interference to it. So I'm going to play around with some areas that are black on my background. This is one of the ways that I love to use interference pads, because interference pads look different on white or light cardstock than they do on black or dark cardstock. And this is a great way to play with that. So I have a detail brush that I use some black soot ink on just to color the dots on the inside of this background. Now, one step that I forgot to do, and I'll show you why that's a necessary step, is I forgot to use a paper towel to clean off any ink that might be on the foiling. And you can see how I got some marks on that background. They're going to be hidden because of the rest of what I plan to do to this background. But just know that if you're doing inking on foiling, it's a good idea to use some paper towel to clean up any ink that might be on that foil. So I'm also going to be using this ink to do a little ink blending around the outside. Now I went in further than I had intended originally. If you want the background to be a little bit lighter, don't ink blend quite as much into the center of that image. Then clean off your mat, because we're going to need it in just a moment. We don't want to pick up any of that black ink, so we're going to clean it up really, really well. Then put our cardstock right back on there, and we can go back in with this Sunset Pink interference pad. So I have a different brush here that I'm using for my interference pads. Personally, I have a brush for each one of my interference pads. I have them labeled I just get inexpensive brushes, and this is how I like to work. Some people will have brushes for their interference pads and they'll just mix and match and just use them. I personally prefer to have a brush for each one of them. Again, personal preference. You don't necessarily have to, but I like having it this way. So I have my color here that I'm using around the whole background here, and you can see how we've got some beautiful pink on the inside, but when it comes to tilting it into the light, we see more of that yellowy gold interference. Now I'm going to be using the bear from the Charmed Life die of the large die of the month to do as an image on the front here. So I have the little handkerchief there that goes around his neck. I inked that with the Sunset Pink pad as well. And I'm also inking around my mat to go behind my background. So I did these pieces out of some velvet cardstock. This has an adhesive back to it. I put it onto some cardstock scraps and then die cut it. It just die cuts just like regular cardstock, but it has a really beautiful soft finish to it. Now, because my background ended up being darker than I had intended, the bear is a little bit more hidden. It's not quite as prominent as I would have liked. However, if you want to have it be a little bit more prominent, alternate the colors. So here I have the bear in the darker brown and the details in the lighter brown. If you change it and do the bear in the lighter brown and then do the details in the darker brown, it's going to show up on that background better. But I also like how the card shows off that glimmer and interference background as well. So there's bonuses to both, but it just depends on the final look that you're going for. If you want to see the bear more on that background, just alternate the colors and do the light as the dark, dark as the light. Now, when I was doing my die cutting, this is intended to be a charm hanging off a purse. So the legs face inward. It's kind of bow-legged where the toes curve inward. So I have two legs that are not going to work on this bear because I want him sitting in the corner of the card. So I grabbed another piece of that velvet cardstock, put it onto some scrap cardstock, and then die cut the other leg. So I have them facing the right way for the way that I intend for this guy to be sitting. Then I'm adding the eyes to the background. That's just done out of just some regular black cardstock. The nose is done out of some blush cardstock, and that just gets put on his little muzzle. Now, I regularly use this velvet cardstock for little animals or things that I think should be fuzzy, and it works beautifully. It adds some extra texture to your cards. The one thing that you need to be aware of, though, is it takes a little bit longer to dry because that velvet just wants to absorb the glue first before it actually starts to set and dry. It does take a little bit of extra patience, a little bit longer for that glue to start setting and to dry. So what I'll often do is glue my pieces together, put an acrylic block on top of it, and then just let it sit for longer than I would typically do with cardstock. I'll set that over to the side and we're ready to start assembling our card. So first we're going to do our mat here, and this one was trimmed to 4 inches by 5¼ inches before I added that Sunset Pink interference ink to it. Then we're adding our glimmer background to that background, and that glimmer or that interference ink, when you tilt it into the light, it just has some gorgeous shine to it. So I had intended for this bear to go in the bottom left corner, and that's where I put it. You could also center it if you wanted that bear to be more on the lighter inside of the card or center of the card. You could put it in the center as well, and I think that would look fantastic as well. But just the contrast between that beautiful interference and glimmer background and the velvet cardstock of the bear just adds so much texture to the card. So I'm also going to be using the large die of the month Charmed Life for this one as well. I'm going to be using my glimmer background that was on the orchid cardstock. This die set has a curved die that you see that me using here that does the top corner of the purse. So I'm going to position it how I want it to go. I don't tape this one in place because it's not really going to move on me as I'm die cutting, and if it does slightly, it's not really going to be that big of a deal. It doesn't need to be as precise as when I'm die cutting sentiments. So for this particular one, I'm doing the cherry charm from this die set. There's also some fuzzy dice. There's a little purse. There's that bear that I just used in the last one. So there's a few different options here. I think that dice would be really fun to do with that velvet cardstock to make them fuzzy dice as well. And you could really have some fun with some of the colors of the velvet cardstock to do those dice. Now, had I realized how this was going to go, I probably would have chosen different charms, but I'm doing the cherry for this one, and it will make sense in just a little while why I'm saying that. Now, I have the cherries done with some ruby cardstock from the Ruby Treasured cardstock pat. This one is the matte finish, but you could also do the mirror. I think that would be fun as well. I just wanted something that had different texture from the regular cardstock, but I am using some cranberry cardstock for the background pieces of those cherries. So one of them, you have two different faces to choose from for the cherries, and I'm using one of each one of them. One of them has some openings for the mouth, and that's going to be the color of the background that shows through. So I wanted a similar color, but I wanted a different texture to it. I also have a little bow that goes on top of these cherries. That's done with just white cardstock. The leaves and stems were die cut out of some rainforest cardstock. So as I'm as I'm gluing these pieces together, I'm just going to put my acrylic block on there. It just holds everything flat, but it frees up my hands to work on other things. For the accents for the purse, I'm using some of that matte rose gold cardstock from that treasured cardstock pack. This works perfectly with that blush glimmer foil, and I thought it would be fun to have coordinating accents with that glimmer foil. Another option here would be to solid hot foil a piece of Hammer and Mill cardstock and then use that for die cutting if you don't happen to have that rose gold treasure cardstock. You could do that as well. It's always nice to have different alternatives, or even inking a piece of cardstock with that rose gold ink pad and then die cutting. That's another option as well. So as I'm adding little accents to the purse piece, I do let them dry for a few moments as I'm working on them, because metallic cardstocks have a finish coating on them, so they don't absorb the glue the same way that regular cardstock do. So I let them dry for a little bit longer just to allow that glue to dry a little bit better. So there's also a little lock piece in this die set, so I have that die cut of the rose gold cardstock as well. I thought it'd be cute hanging that off of one of the little chains. I love the fact that there are so many different options with these die sets, so many different ways that you can use them. I'm using this pretty much in the way that it was intended to be charms hanging off a purse, but there's a little scarf thing that you can tie on the chain of the purse. You can really customize it, customize the colors that you use, and just have a lot of fun with it. There's these little cheek pieces that I'm putting on the cherries, and I have those die cut of that cranberry cardstock as well. You could do it out of, say, some blush cardstock so that you see them a little bit better, but I didn't really want them to be distracting from those cherries, so I thought just having a different finish would be nice. So here is that purse. Now I thought this would look cute on the stencil of the month background, so the cherry chic, but I wanted to change it up from the last way I did it. So I'm not going to be stenciling those stripes in the background. I'm only going to be stenciling the cherries. So it's a great way to get two different looks out of this stencil set. So I'm starting off with that Twisted Citron Distress ink, just inking up those little stems for the cherries. Now technically you don't have to do the entire background because it's only about the top third of the card that is going to be visible, that's not going to be covered with the purse, but I typically like to do the whole thing anyways. I've got everything there. I might as well finish it off, and it's just kind of I don't want to do part of the background and then realize there's an area that was missing. So by doing the whole thing, I know that it's done. So for the cherries, I'm going to be doing that aged mahogany first. Then I'm using a clean piece or a dry microfiber cloth, and cleaning off that stencil. And then I'm going to go in with that sunset pink interference pad. This way I'm going to have mostly the same color for my cherries as that aged mahogany. It's going to brighten it up with this sunset pink, but it's also going to have that beautiful interference shimmer to it. So it's just going to change up those cherries in a little bit of a different way from the last way that it was done. Next, I'm putting the third stencil on, and for some reason I grabbed the prize ribbon pad. I like the way it looks, but once I was done, I was like, I didn't really know what I was thinking when I did that. You can change it up the way that you want to. Normally I would grab the Twisted Citron and do it with that. That's what I should have grabbed. It looks okay with that prize ribbon. It's, I'm not really sure blue and green leaves make any sense, but that's okay. So then I glue it onto the back of my A2 card. I didn't trim it down at all because I thought it was going to be too much to have it trimmed down plus have the purse on there. Next, I'm putting my purse on there, but I have to trim down my chain that those cherries were hanging off. Now that piece has dried a bit. So I'm gluing this onto that background. And to me, this is just too busy. Now, I did the cherry background. I did the cherry charms because I was going to do the cherry background and I thought they were going to tie in with each other. In my mind, it didn't look quite as busy, and it might have been better if, say, the purse was plain, wasn't foiled, but I end up taking the purse off and I'm going to just put it on a plain background. I have one of the foiled sentiments that says charmed to meet you, charmed, it's a charmed life. I can't remember exactly what it says, but it has the word charmed in it, which works perfectly with this little purse here. So I glue this just to a white card base, and this could be whatever color you want for that background. I just thought the solid background was a bit better with the purse that is kind of a little bit cluttered with charms. Now, personally, I'm not the type of person, I don't carry a purse anyways, but I'm not the type of person to put a ton of charms to things. So this wouldn't be my cup of tea anyways with those charms. I get the point of it. And I have a daughter that loves having them hanging off her purse. So I totally get it, but I like it better with that solid background because of all of those charms there. And that third one there was the wax seal of the month. I had intended to add it earlier, but I totally forgot about it until taking the card apart and redoing it basically. But I wanted to share that with the background. Someone else out there might love it, but it did inspire this card here because I really loved the look of that cherry background done differently without having those stripes behind it. So I'm going to do this background again. I can't reuse the one that I had just taken off that card because I glued the purse onto it. So I have glue marks all over it. So that one got tossed and I'm just going to quickly redo it. And it takes minutes to redo a background. So it's really not something that takes a whole long time. So I have another piece of hammer mill cardstock here. This first layer stenciled with that twisted citron. The next layer I'm going to do same as my last card. So I'm going to do it with that aged mahogany first. I'm going to be using the dry microfiber cloth to clean off the stencil, and then I'm going to be going back in with that sunset pink. But I'm going to take those cherries here. I have them die cut at a hammer mill cardstock, and I'm going to ink those in exactly the same way. So I have those inked with that aged mahogany. I'm going to take any excess ink off of that stencil as well as around those cherries, and then go in with that sunset pink interference ink. And I just love how not only it adds that interference, but it just brightens up the color of those cherries as well. I chose the aged mahogany because it went with some of the other colors that I was using with that color palette. But for cherries themselves, it was a little bit too bright, and I didn't really want just a bright red. I wanted it to be a little bit darker. So I really love the look of this, combining the aged mahogany behind that sunset pink interference pad. It looks really, really great. So now those cherries are done. I can do that last layer here. And this time I'm not going to be doing the prized ribbon. I'm going to be going back in with that twisted citron. And this way we're going to have the green leaves. You do get some of the aged mahogany leaves because the stencil that does the cherries does the leaves as well, but I like them like this with the green. I think it looks cute to have those two colors together. So here is our background, and again, I just love the background without those stripes. So I love the fact that it is an option. And I chose to do the cherries in the same way as that background, so they're going to coordinate perfectly with each other. So for this, I have some of that rainforest cardstock used to die cut the leaves as well as the stems, gluing those together. For this one, I'm not going to be doing the bow. Actually, no, I am doing the bow, but I die cut the bow out of one of my solid hot foil glimmer backgrounds. So I have a little bit of that white print on here. It's going to tie in, it's just going to make the ribbon look printed, but it's also going to tie in with the white parts of my background. So when I'm die cutting my backgrounds, sometimes I utilize the prints from those solid hot foiled pieces, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I avoid them. So it just really depends on the look that I'm going for. For this particular card, I'm using the A2 Matting Basics A set for some of the layers for my cherries. It was a long day after no sleep, so I didn't want to figure out the layers for this. I didn't want to do the brain work, so I chose to use this die set as well. You don't have to use the die set. You can just die cut or use your trimmer to trim down your layers and get them exactly how you want to. So because they're rectangles, they're really easy to do with your trimmer. Again, you don't need a die set. I just was not in the mental capacity to figure it out at this moment. So I took my stenciled background here. I trimmed it down to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. And now I'm going to do my mats to go behind my background as well as behind the image piece for my cherries. Now I want them to coordinate perfectly with those cherries. So I am first ink blending the outside edges with that aged mahogany distress ink. Then I'm going to use that same dry microfiber cloth, clean off my mat, make sure I don't have any ink left on that mat. And then I'm going to go in with that Sunset Pink Interference ink. And this way they're going to coordinate perfectly. So for these backgrounds or for these mats, I am going to use a brush to do that ink blending around the edges. When I'm doing them just behind a card piece, I'll typically just use my pad to rub along the outside edges, but you don't necessarily have to. You could use an ink blending brush if you want to, and I did it this way for this one just to show that you easily could. But by doing the aged mahogany ink underneath it, I know that it's going to coordinate perfectly with those cherries. It would be a lot harder to try find some cardstock to match the interference ink. So that's one of the reasons, especially and as well as the metallic inks. And that's one of the reasons why I do my mats the way I do them. It makes it so that they match perfectly and it saves the time for trying to find cardstock that's going to work with it. So I always love how easy it is to make them match perfectly, as well as you get that beautiful shimmer from the interference. So now we're ready to assemble our card. So I'm going to glue down that large mat onto my card base, and I made it the same size as the card base because I want to have as much room for that cherry background as possible. I don't want a lot of it to be covered up, or some of it's going to be covered up in the center with those cherries, but I want to see a whole lot of that background. So after doing the background or putting that background down, I can put the other mat down. These are the die cut ones, then my white piece, and then the piece that my cherries are going to go on. Now, I chose the sentiment that said, life is better with girlfriends. I thought of all the sentiments in the different clubs, that's the one that worked best with these images. Definitely, there's probably other ones out there that would work even better. I think this would be a great card for the spring or the summer as well. I didn't want to go and choose, because there's so many different products in the clubs, I didn't want to go and bring in other sentiments or whatnot. So I chose that one. I thought that was the best for this. There you saw the two different backgrounds together and you can see how completely different they look. And I love the fact that you can get two different looks with them by simply eliminating two of the different layers for that background. So next we're going to do the stitching die of the month. And this one is called Forever Fabulous. It's absolutely adorable. It has this cute little dog and a little doggy sweater. So I chose some orchid as well as lavender cardstock to do the doggy sweater with. Obviously you can choose whatever colors you want. The different layers to go on top are really easy to position because when you die cut the bottom piece, it indents the different stripes in there, so you can just match the different sizes and the different stripes. So it's really easy to know which piece goes where. So I also use that velvet cardstock for this little dog. So once again, it's going to take a little bit longer for that cardstock to dry. If you don't have that velvet cardstock, regular cardstock will work, but this just adds so much great texture to the elements and so easily. And it die cuts just like regular cardstock, so it's really easy to die cut. Now I have this doggy face upside down, and I realize it in just a moment when I go to glue other pieces to the front. When I go to glue the nose piece, I realize that the eyes are positioned wrong. This is one of the reasons where it's really nice, and that's where I realized it, really nice to have liquid glue to be gluing things together, because that glue hadn't set yet, so it was really easy to just pick them off, rotate them the way they were supposed to be rotated, and then add those details to that dog nose. So I love the fact that with liquid glue you can move and shimmy things in place, and you have the ability to do that. But in instances like this where you accidentally put things on wrong, you have that time forgiveness to alternate them. Obviously, if the glue had completely dried, it would be a little bit harder, but it's nice while you're working to be able to fix them and alter them. So as we're gluing, just like I said before, the velvet cardstock here for the dog needs just a little bit of extra time to dry. And you'll see later on, even after I've let this dry a little bit, the ears aren't quite glued down properly. It will be fine when I go to glue the card together because it's all going to be glued to the base of the card. So for pieces like this, they're not separate pieces that are going to have to support themselves. So for the metallic accents on the purse handle, I just die cut one of my Glimmer of the Month backgrounds. The pieces in between the pattern, it was just the right amount, or that had the right space in order to be able to die cut those pieces. So they were perfect for that. You could also use the rose gold treasured cardstock pack for that, or you could create your own with that rose gold pad. So for this particular card, I'm using DMC floss number 435. The cardstock for the purse is the Cosmic Sky cardstock, so a nice kind of royal blue. I wanted the stitching to be able to be visible, and I wanted it to kind of echo some of the blush glimmer foil accents on the, well, basically on the handle of the card, but I don't have any rose gold floss. I don't actually know if it exists. So this color was fairly similar. It doesn't have that metallic quality to it, but it was close enough to kind of give that look to it. Now, when you're using stitching dies, when you die cut them, there are little indents put into that die cut, and it shows you exactly where the stitching is intended to go. So when you're doing your stitching, I am just following those little lines, going up and down. It doesn't matter how the back looks. I die cut a second piece, and I'm going to be gluing this onto that second piece. By doing that, it's going to add just a tiny little bit of dimension. It's going to seal in my floss, and we're never going to be able to see this. It's going to be glued to the back of a card, so it doesn't really matter what the back looks like as long as the front looks great. When I'm doing the stitching as well, I'm using 2 strands of the floss, so I separate that and only use 2 strands. I use a tiny little piece of Best Ever craft tape to tape the end of the floss down. Anytime I start or stop, I use another piece of that tape to glue or to tape down that floss, trim off the excess with some detail scissors, and then I start back up again using some more of that tape to tape down my string or my floss ends. That way I don't have to worry about pieces coming out. I know it's nice and secure. I can just focus on doing my stitching. By doing the stitching on the dies, it just adds some extra texture and some extra detail. Obviously, I wouldn't do this for every single card because it does take a little bit of extra time, but it's fun to have that little bit of stitching detail on some cards to make them extra special, especially for people that you know would appreciate that. So as I'm stitching this, I'm kind of going in that C curve around the pattern of this particular die. Typically when I do that stitching, I kind of pay attention to what needs to be stitched and where I'm going to start and stop. I kind of plan that out ahead of time. Once I'm completely done, I use that Best Ever craft tape to secure that floss at the end. Then I use my Barely Art glue to glue this to my other piece. Now, because there's the dimension from the floss on the back as well as the front, I use some sewing clips to hold my pieces together while they're dry. That way I have my hands free to work on other things, and I can have the patience to let that completely dry while I'm doing that. So I'll set that aside to dry. I just have these always sitting on my desk, so anytime I need things to dry, especially when it comes to stitching things, I can secure them together and I know that they're not going to move on me. So for this card, I'm using one of my foiled backgrounds with the indigo cardstock. Now, there's not a whole lot of color difference between the indigo and Cosmic Sky when you're looking at it here. There's a whole lot more in person, but my background here, my mat is trimmed to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 inch. You can see that's the piece that I die cut the pieces that I stitched for the little purse there. Then I trimmed down my glimmered background there to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So we get a little bit of that Cosmic Sky around the outside edges. And because I have a piece going over top of it, you're never going to know that anything was cut out of the center. Just a great way to extend your cardstock a little bit. So with my background done, I'm ready to add the main elements, which is the purse and the little puppy dog there. So I glue the puppy dog to the base or the inside part of the purse, glue the front just around the outside edges, and then glue on that handle. Now I happen to have a piece here, the little bandana for the bear. It gets die cut at the same time as the bows for the cherries from that particular set. I just thought, why not use it? So I added that to the little chihuahua here. It coordinates with the foiled background as well as the little foil pieces on the purse handle. Just adds a little bit of extra detail. Obviously, that's a step that you don't need to do, but I do think it looks really cute on them. Then I chose one of my foiled sentiments and glued it to the card. Now, when I chose it, I thought it was one of the same colors as the little sweater that the puppy has is actually not the same color. It's a little bit off. So I ended up using the one done on the Cosmic Sky instead. That way it's going to match the purse perfectly, as well as my little mat around there. Now I'm going to use a little bit of glossy accents on the nose as well as the eyes. Now I've learned that when using velvet cardstock, be really careful with glossy accents. That velvet cardstock really likes to absorb it. So when I put it on, I only put it on the pupils of the eyes, and then I put it on the nose, making sure that I didn't go anywhere near the velvet cardstock. Then I set that aside to dry so that I could work on my last card here while that was drying. So the last card here, I'm using the Caboodle item. So this is a pig with angel wings, and the set is called When Pigs Fly. Now, personally, I really wish there was also a sentiment with this set, because I think that would be absolutely perfect. I chose a different one from one of the sentiments that I already did. So the sentiment that I chose says, "Thanks for showing up in style," which works perfectly for this as well. But I do think one about pigs flying would be perfect. So I chose to die cut the wings out of vellum. Whenever it comes to wings, I just like the look of the vellum. And the front of the pig is done with some pink velvet cardstock. The background is just done with some orchid cardstock. So I like the combination of the two together. Now that pig could also be used with that Charmed Life large die of the month, using it as a charm hanging from the purse as well, which I think would be adorable. I opted to use it in a different way. I'm using the 3D embossing folder of the month for another background, using it with some hammermill cardstock, using the stacking on my machine for a 3D embossing folder. Now I'm going to use that same pearl cardstock or pearl ink that I used with this same background for that champagne card, but because I'm doing it with white cardstock, we're going to see just that pearl shimmer. We're not going to see the white because it's on white cardstock. So my mat, I used that orchid cardstock, trimmed it down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My embossed piece here, trimmed it down to 3 3/4 inches by 4 inches. I'm going to do that background the same as I did for that purple background. And again, we're only going to see the shimmer from the pearl, but it just adds a beautiful shine to that background. So for the purple one, I did it just going up and down. For this one, I did it both ways, just to add that little bit of shine to it. You only really see it when you tilt it into the light, whereas the purple one, you see it without that because you get a little bit of that white around the edges. But I just thought it looked really nice with that embossing folder, as well as just adding a little bit of extra texture and shine to that background. So then I add the pig to the front, as well as the foiled sentiment. Super, super easy card. Here are all of the sentiments that I have left. This is just the sentiments from the BetterPress of the month set. I also have more left from the stamp of the month. So I just put those in Ziploc bags, leave them with those packages they were created with. Next time I'm using them, I might already have a sentiment done, ready to go that I can use. So here's that finished card, and you can see how the pearl ink really catches the light as you tilt it into the light. Super simple card, but really, really cute. Then we have our little puppy dog in the purse with the stitching die of the month. And I love all those metallic accents, how they catch the light when you tilt it as well. And that stitching really gives a lot of texture to that purse. Then we have our adorable little cherries with that cherry background, using that stencil of the month. That pink sunset, or the sunset pink interference ink, also gives them some beautiful shimmer, so that really catches the light. Then we have our Charmed Life purse with the plain background, because the cherry background, in my opinion, was just too much. But I actually think that having that plain background lets you really focus on those little charms that are hanging down too. Then we have our background that uses the glimmered background with that sunset pink interference ink, and that adorable little bear done with the velvet cardstock. This one would be cute as a baby card as well, with some more baby-ish colors, but I think it's just nice with all of that different texture. Then we have our Let's Do Brunch bacon and eggs with that Glimmer embossed background. And that embossed background isn't really visible until you really look at the card, but it just adds a lot of texture to it. Then we have our champagne flutes with that 3D embossing folder, as well as that pearl pad to add some extra shimmer. Our BetterPress of the month, colored with those Prismacolor pencils. Very, very simple card, but I just think that image is so striking. Then our 3 cards done with the clear stamp of the month. This one done with that stenciled background. And again, you get a very, very different look when you add those stripes to that cherry background than you do without. So it's nice to be able to get such different looks from the same products. Then our one with the embossing folder of the month as the background. And doing that coloring with those Prismacolor pencils is so super easy, but the result is fantastic. Then our first card with that Glimmer of the month background. So all of these cards were just so much fun to create. I love coloring with those Prismacolor pencils, and I think they create a great result. And the shimmer you get from both the sunset pad as well as the pearl and the rose gold pad, as well as those metallic accents, they're fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.